Greetings gamers, this is Zesh on Nerdlife, and you're watching a review. This is something new on the channel. I wasn't going to do reviews, but I decided that I really enjoy this sort of thing, so why not do it every once in a while and see how it goes. The first game we're going to review on this channel is Neverwinter. Neverwinter, for all intents and purposes, is an MMO. A genre that seems to be on its own little island in terms of how reviewers see the games and rate them. A genre that is generally graded on the content that you reach only after wasting 2 months of play. It's an unfortunate situation, and it's a saucy minx that can rarely be easily reviewed. Do you review it based on the genre's built-in standards, or do you review it based on the standards of the entire industry? Do you look at it compared to World of Warcraft, or do you look at it compared to all the other RPGs in the world? I think it's a balance, and I hope to do just that when we take a look at the Perfect World's entry into the Neverwinter franchise. Neverwinter follows Neverwinter Nights 1 and 2, which were brought to us by BioWare and their faithful partners Obsidian, respectively. This is a breakaway from the previous two in terms of a basic genre change from the standard RPG with heavy emphasis on their Dungeons & Dragons roots to the MMO side of the role-playing game, with a move away from the old-school dice rolls of D&D and on to the increasingly popular action RPG hybrid that has taken over the genre. So what you're saying is there aren't any dice in the D&D game? Yes, that's right, but there's no need to lose control of your bowels. It's high time that developers started taking the element of luck out of their games and allowed skill to shine. As much as the sound of a D6 rolling across a wooden coffee table gets my nerd organs titillated, this is undeniably a great move. With Guild Wars 2 and friends ushering in what seems to be a slight step forward for the genre's stand and mash button roots, Neverwinter could easily fall into the back of the crowd as another game riding on the coattails of someone else's innovations, without actually improving the system in question. Neverwinter does not fall into this category, in my humble opinion. In reading the chat during the various betas, I waded through the various awfulness. The arguments between elitists, the comparisons to World of Warcraft that every game gets, the references to sexuality, and the general references to the penis. There were subtle arguments that you could find about the weight of the game's combat, which confused me because, one, I'm easily confused, but mostly because I thought the combat was one of the game's strongest features, a true shining point that I experienced during my time in the game. At times in Guild Wars 2, for all of its greatness, I found the combat shallow. The dodging mechanics were rarely actually necessary, save dodging the occasional mega-telegraphed power attacks. You were usually best suited to stand and mash your buttons per the usual. Thanks to poor planning by the developers, the various pieces of combat just didn't fit with each other. It was a great effort, but it never really clicked for me. Neverwinter's enemies play to the combat style. They aren't on you constantly. Perhaps this is just a matter of having more telegraphed attacks, but the game feels more like an action game, rather than an MMORPG forcing action elements into the box. The weight is certainly there, and I think you'll find, especially when playing classes like the Control Wizard, that you're titillated by the various ways you can avoid attacks while still burning off goblin faces. In an action game, for instance, you're playing a boss. You can easily, after several deaths, learn the boss's mechanics and dodge all of its moves. You can do this to an extent in an MMORPG. All the boss fights are very systematic, but it's not the same as in your face. He follows up an attack with his overhand swing, he then does a big long swing, then he shoots fire out of his butt, and in order to do this you have to dodge left, quickly move in, get behind him, slash his taint twice, and then he'll fall over and let you punch him in the face 3 times, and then he'll get back up and repeat it again. It's very different from the standard MMO fare where you just run to a certain part of the map until he gets done, you know, farting. I don't know, whatever his special ability is. So the point is, this feels closer to an action game in terms of combat than it does in terms of an MMORPG combat. But what is Neverwinter's selling point? As a free-to-play game, it is easy for a developer to fall in the trap of saying, well, it's free. A trap that a lot of developers seem to be tumbling into over and over again. It has everything that WoW does, but without the $15 a month. Is that what you want to see on your price tags? Developers seem to be comfortable saying this over and over again and then putting their games in our laps and expecting us to love them for it. But that isn't enough in a new era where every game is free to play. You have to develop a AAA MMO whether the price tag is $60 and a $15 monthly fee or not. And with Neverwinter, that selling point comes in the form of the Foundry. One of the biggest reasons that the previous Neverwinter games were so great is because after you completed the excellent single-player campaign, you're provided with the tools to easily create your own story and world. It would even be argued that this game isn't the first Neverwinter MMO, considering how many huge and in-depth online worlds were created with both of the Neverwinter Nights toolsets that still are ongoing to this day. The Foundry takes this lineage and goes with it, allowing players to create their own quests, their own dungeons that have arcing storylines and legitimate rewards. And in addition to that, they allow players taking part in these quests or arcing campaigns to rate and review them accordingly, allowing the best of this user-generated content to float to the top of the pile. The Foundry in itself has the ability to take a game that is the middle of the road in most other places and make it a true contender, doing something completely original for the genre and doing it extremely well. But Neverwinter isn't all A+ across the board. There are areas where the game simply falls flat. But they are areas, in my opinion, that can be easily remedied before the official launch. The sound, for instance, has a lot of work that could be done to fix it. In general, it's not awful. The soundtrack scores are top-notch, but the delivery of said scores are tedious at best. Instead of action music being queued up when you enter combat, it is constantly playing based on the zone you're in, which is like the equivalent of having caffeine pumped into your eardrums in the form of a bunch of angry people in an orchestra filled with old dudes beating on drums and playing violin. As brilliant a picture as that paints, it is exhausting when you're in a zone for combat for longer than 10 minutes. You will end up turning the music down to 0 and going on your way, thus making the money that Perfect World paid its music department pointless. Another weak point was some strange post-processing effects on sound on the ambient voices of mobs. For instance, when a mob is attacking your badass dwarf warrior and yells some typical maniacal ramble, it sounds like someone hired a random person to yell things through a ventrilo server using a microphone fashioned out of a tin cup and a bunch of despair. The game clearly knows what good sound is. The voiceovers for the quest givers are generally immaculate, so just a matter of polishing up the rest before launch will suffice. Right now, parts of the sound in the game is sort of like a dead limb. It just dangles there, catching the eye of everyone no matter how bad they feel about staring at it. Another weak point is obviously the graphics. As you can see by the video, they aren't awful, but they certainly really aren't trying very hard. There is a trench in the MMO genre, just this stagnant pit where the graphics have refused to dig themselves out of. A few try here and there, and the trench is definitely more and more shallow as people realize the technological barrier that used to be there is simply not there anymore. You can legitimately have Crysis 3 graphics in a massively online game now. It's simply a matter of wanting to do it. Neverwinter doesn't. It sits calmly in with the games like World of Warcraft, resting on the fact that, quote-unquote, more people with lesser computers can play their game. Technology keeps moving ahead, and now you can buy a $400 laptop that can play most modern games on, at the very least, medium settings, so that excuse is slowly becoming less relevant. This is not to say that the game has the worst graphics of all time. It sits just ahead of the latest renditions of World of Warcraft and just below games like Guild Wars 2, which sport a little more effort in the graphical department. In addition, the art style is strong despite a mediocre delivery. The environments are all diverse despite taking place in a single city, and everything is all very close to how Dungeons & Dragons seems to want to be portrayed. You can compare the often overlooked Dungeons & Dragons Online art style to Neverwinter and see a lot of similarities in how certain places look, which I think adds to an already strong nostalgia that a lot of players who are going to partake in just about every D&D centric game put out, including DDO and the Neverwinter titles. That said, I am actually excited about Neverwinter. excited enough to pay the ridiculous sum of $200 as a Foundry before I even had a chance to play the game. And while I can honestly say waiting and trying out a beta might be the best bet for everyone else, I do think the money is a proud investment in a game that certainly looks to be looking in a bright direction. Being excited about an MMO is largely impossible for a lot of us, as we are all very jaded at this point. With what could be considered as a long stream of failures, including the little juggernaut that couldn't with Star Wars The Old Republic, and a good attempt that simply fell flat for a lot of us in Guild Wars 2. It is a field of jaded customers falling on their swords as the genre and its developers have ripped our souls out time and time again. So for me, being even remotely excited about a title in the genre is a big deal. That said, I hope you found this review and this footage from the beta we've provided helpful in your decision to try or die with Neverwinter. Please leave a comment below if you have any insight into Perfect World's new MMORPG, and hit the like button if you'd like to see more reviews coming out of NerdLife. Until next time, this has been Ash on NerdLife. Play on, players.